The silence after a death is a strange thing. It's not empty. It's heavy. It's filled with the ghosts of words you wish you'd said and the echoes of laughter you'll never hear again. After I lost my parents, that silence was all I had. It was this suffocating blanket in our once vibrant home, a place that used to smell like my mother's baking and my father's pipe tobacco, but now just smelled of dust and wilting funeral flowers. I thought that crushing loss was the worst it could get. I was wrong. It turns out, silence can be the prelude to a storm, and some storms aren't meant to be weathered. They're meant to be waged. My uncle stood at my parents' funeral and called me family. He put this heavy hand on my shoulder, his face a perfect mask of sorrow, and whispered all the right things about legacy and love. A week later, he handed me a forged will that left me with nothing but a locked music box and a condescending smile. He thought he'd stolen my future. He thought he'd erased me from my own life, making me a footnote in the story of my own family. What he didn't know was that he'd just handed me the key to his destruction. He'd given me the one thing that could unravel a dynasty built on lies, and I was about to pull the thread. My parents were the sun and moon of my world. My dad, with his quiet strength and hands that could fix anything from a leaky faucet to a broken heart, was my anchor. My mom, so vibrant and full of life, was my guiding star. She believed in the magic of small things, the first flower of spring, the smell of old books, the melody of a half-forgotten song. We weren't wealthy, not in the way people usually mean, but our life was rich in everything that mattered. It was woven with love, integrity, and the simple comfort of knowing you belong. My Uncle David, my father's younger brother, was different. Where my dad was content, David was eaten up by ambition. He was a man who wore expensive suits that never seemed to fit his character, whose smile was always a little too wide, his handshake a little too firm. He, my Aunt Carol, and my cousins Mark and Jessica lived in a world of polished surfaces and perfect appearances. We were family, but it felt like we were from different planets. Their visits always had this faint air of condescension, a subtle judgment of our simpler life. My mom called it the gleam of the empty, a hunger for things you could buy instead of earn. My dad just called it David being David and would disappear into his workshop. Their death was a blur of police reports and hushed whispers. A tragic accident, they said, a slippery road on a dark night. The details were a knife that twisted with every retelling. At the funeral, David took center stage. He gave this moving eulogy about his beloved brother and sister-in-law, his voice cracking at all the right moments. He wrapped me in a hug that felt like a cage, his crocodile tears damp on my shoulder. "You're not alone," he promised, his voice thick with fake grief. "We'll take care of everything, your family." The will reading was a week later. Not in the warm, familiar office of Mr. Abernathy, my parents' longtime lawyer and friend. It was in some sterile, glass-walled conference room downtown, with a lawyer I'd never seen before. His name was Fields, and he had the cold demeanor of a man who delivered bad news for a living. Uncle David sat next to me, a hand on my back in a gesture that was supposed to look supportive but felt like he was staking a claim. Aunt Carol and my cousins were there too, their faces arranged in masks of solemn concern. Mr. Fields cleared his throat and started reading. The document was thick, official, and a complete work of fiction. It talked about debts I knew didn't exist and a business on the brink of collapse. It painted my careful, practical father as some reckless gambler who'd mortgaged everything. And then, the final blow. Because of these fake debts, the entire estate, the house I grew up in, my parents' savings, their life insurance, was to be transferred to David, who, the will claimed, had generously agreed to take on all the liabilities. I was left with one thing. "To my only child," the will read, "I leave the antique music box from my mother's collection, that they might always have a piece of their heritage to hold on to." The room was spinning. I couldn't feel the floor. I looked at David, searching his face for any sign that this was all a sick joke. All I got was a calm, pitying smile. "I know this is a shock," he said, his voice oozing practiced sympathy. "Your father, he kept his troubles from you. Didn't want you to worry. He made me promise if anything happened that I would make things right. This is me honoring his wishes." It was the most outrageous lie I had ever heard. My father was meticulous. He balanced his checkbook to the penny. He and Mr. Abernathy went over his portfolio every 6 months. The idea of him drowning in debt wasn't just unlikely, it was impossible. "No," I whispered, the word getting stuck in my throat. "That's not right. Their lawyer is Mr. Abernathy." David's smile tightened just a fraction. "Ah, yes, Abernathy. Your father switched firms a few months ago, said he wanted a fresh perspective. It's all in the paperwork." He patted a neat stack of documents on the table. Forged. Every last page had to be forged. I was walked out of that conference room like a confused kid. David handed me a cardboard box with a music box inside. It was beautiful, made of dark, inlaid wood, with a mother-of-pearl ballerina on top. But it felt like a tiny coffin in my hands. It was locked, and there was no key. The days that followed were a systematic teardown of my life. As executor, David moved with terrifying speed. My parents' bank accounts were frozen, then swallowed by his. Movers came to empty my home, their professional detachment a horrible contrast to the emotional bomb they were setting off in my life. I had 48 hours to get my personal things. I walked through the rooms of my childhood, now tagged for liquidation, a ghost in my own history. David and Carol offered me a place to stay, the tiny guest room in the basement of their mansion. It was charity as a performance, a way to show the world how they'd magnanimously taken in their poor, orphaned niece. I refused. The thought of sleeping under their roof, eating food bought with my parents' stolen life, made me sick. I found a tiny, grim apartment on the other side of town with peeling paint and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. My small savings disappeared fast. I sold my car. I got a job waiting tables, where the long hours and low pay were a constant reminder of how far I'd fallen. The humiliation was a shadow I couldn't shake. I'd see my cousins, Mark and Jessica, all over social media, showing off new cars and exotic vacations, all funded by my parents' legacy. They'd post pictures from our family home, redecorated in my aunt's sterile taste, with captions like "making new memories in the old homestead." Every post was another twist of the knife. My uncle's gaslighting never stopped. He'd call, his voice dripping with fake concern. "How are you holding up? Are you eating? You know, if you just swallow your pride, you could be comfortable here. Your parents would have wanted you to be safe." He talked as if my poverty was my choice, a stubborn refusal of his kindness, not a direct result of his greed. He was rewriting history, painting himself as the savior and me as the ungrateful, broken mess, and people believed him. Our family friends, our neighbors, they all saw the grieving, generous uncle taking care of his poor niece. They saw my refusal of his help as proof that I was unstable. I was completely and utterly alone. My only companion in that desolate apartment was the music box. It sat on my rickety nightstand, a silent monument to everything I'd lost. I hated it. It was the symbol of my dispossession, the cheap parting gift from a thief. It was locked tight, a secret it wouldn't share, just like the family that had thrown me away. For months, I ignored it. But one night, when the loneliness felt like a physical weight on my chest, I picked it up. I ran my fingers over the intricate inlay. My mother had loved this box. Why this? Of all the things he could have picked for his grand, sentimental gesture, why this? It was a puzzle, and my mother loved puzzles. "Look closer," she always used to say. "There's always more than what you see on the surface." So I started looking. I turned it over and over, checking every seam, every corner, and then I saw it. On the bottom in the inlaid wood wasn't a keyhole. It was a pattern, a series of tiny carved flowers, a rose, a lily, a daisy, another rose. It was a code. It was the sequence of notes from the first song she ever taught me on the piano. With trembling fingers, I pressed the flowers in that order. There was a soft click. A tiny, almost invisible drawer slid open from the base. It wasn't the main compartment. It was something hidden. Inside, there was no velvet lining, just a single object folded tightly. It was a small, leather-bound diary, its pages filled with my mother's elegant handwriting. My heart stopped. He hadn't given me a worthless trinket. He had given me a weapon, and I was finally ready to learn how to use it. Suddenly, the air in my tiny apartment felt electric. My hands were shaking as I opened the diary. The first few pages were like a balm on my soul. It was my mother's voice, her essence captured in ink. She wrote about planting her garden, about a funny thing my dad had said, about being proud of a good grade I'd brought home. It was like she was in the room with me. For a few perfect moments, the grief was replaced by the warmth of her memory. I read for hours, just devouring her words, crying and smiling at the same time. This was the real inheritance. But as I got to the entries from the last year of her life, the tone started to change. It was subtle at first, a single thread of worry. October 12th, she wrote, David came over again. Another can't-miss business idea. Richard, my father, is skeptical as always. David goes on and on about expansion, legacy, securing our future. Richard says our future is already secure. I see that hunger in David's eyes. It worries me. The entries got more frequent, more troubled. My dad, a man of unshakable integrity, was being pressured by his brother. Apparently, David had found some loophole in international shipping regulations, a way to import high-end electronics and misclassify them to dodge huge tariffs. He called it aggressive accounting. Smart business. November 5th, Richard is furious. He and David had a terrible fight. Richard called it what it is, fraud. He wants nothing to do with it. David called him a coward, content to live a small life while real men built empires. He said the most awful thing. He said, "You've always been a passenger, Richard, never the pilot." I saw how much that hurt my husband. My blood ran cold. This was it. This was the start of it all. My uncle wasn't just some common thief. He was a criminal who tried to drag my father down with him. The diary laid it all out. My dad had refused again and again. But David was relentless. He started showing up with documents and partnership agreements. My mom wrote about how my dad would lock himself in his study for hours, trying to figure out how to talk sense into his brother without blowing up the family. Then I read the entry that changed everything. January 22nd. Something is wrong. Richard found a discrepancy in the accounts of the small investment firm he and David co-own, the one from their father. It's not a discrepancy. It's a gaping hole. David has been using the firm as his personal piggy bank for years, siphoning money to fund his lifestyle and risky ventures. That fraud scheme wasn't just a proposal. He's already been doing it, using their joint company as a front. He didn't need Richard's approval. He needed his signature on a loan to cover the hole before an audit. He implicated my husband without him even knowing. I had to put the diary down. I felt sick to my stomach. My father, the most honest man I knew, had his name and reputation used to enable his brother's crimes. The diary continued, a horrible chronicle of my dad realizing he was trapped. If he exposed David, the family name would be ruined, their company would collapse, and he might even face legal trouble himself. If he did nothing, he'd be complicit. He chose a third option. He decided to fight back. February 16th. Richard has been working nonstop. He's gathering evidence. He says David is a cancer, and you can't reason with a cancer, you have to cut it out. He's compiling everything, the false shipping manifests, the hidden bank statements, the emails. He's building a case. He's going to confront David and force him to undo it all and confess, or he's taking it to the authorities. He keeps everything in a fireproof safe, hidden in the wall behind the bookshelf in his study. The combination is my birthday. My breath caught in my throat. The study, the bookshelf, I could see it perfectly in my mind. The final entries were terrifying. My mother's elegant script became a frantic scrawl. March 3rd, David knows, I don't know how, but he knows what Richard is doing. He came to the house when Richard was out. He didn't yell. He was calm, and it was the scariest thing I've ever seen. He told me Richard was going to destroy the family over a simple misunderstanding. He told me to make my husband stop. He said, "Some things once broken can't be fixed, and some secrets are best left buried." It wasn't advice. It was a threat. March 5th, I am so afraid. Richard is determined to go to Mr. Abernathy tomorrow morning with everything. We're supposed to go for a drive tonight up to the old lookout to clear our heads before the storm breaks. I've hidden this diary. If you are reading this, my dearest child, it is because the worst has happened. Do not let him win. The truth is in the study. The truth is everything. Be smart. Be brave. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. That was the last entry. They died that night. It wasn't an accident. It couldn't have been. My uncle had threatened them 2 days before their car went off the road. He hadn't just stolen my inheritance. He had stolen my entire world. The grief I'd been drowning in for months changed. It didn't go away, but it crystallized. It hardened from a suffocating fog into a shard of ice in my chest. The tears stopped. A cold, quiet rage took their place. My purpose was no longer just to survive. It was justice. Poetic, devastating, and absolute justice. First step, I had to get that evidence. But the house, my house, was now a fortress. David and Carol had installed a new security system. I only knew because Jessica had posted a photo on Instagram, thanking her, "Amazing Dad, for making us feel so safe and secure." The irony was a bitter pill. I couldn't just break in. I needed an invitation. So I started to act. I called Uncle David. I swallowed the bile in my throat and made my voice sound small and broken. I told him he was right. I couldn't make it on my own. I'd been foolish and proud. I asked if his offer to stay was still on the table. I could hear the triumph in his voice, even though he tried to veil it with false compassion. "Of course, my dear, your room is waiting. We're family. It's time you came home." I packed my one suitcase, hiding the music box and diary inside. Moving into that house was the hardest thing I've ever done. Every room held a memory, now tainted by the man who had murdered them. Aunt Carol showed me to the basement guest room, a cold space that felt more like a cell. "It's not much," she said with a dismissive wave, "but it'll do." For 2 weeks, I was the perfect, pitiable niece. Quiet, helpful, and grateful, I did chores. I complimented Aunt Carol's cooking. I listened patiently to David's lectures on financial responsibility, and I watched. I learned their routines. David and Carol went out every Friday night, same time, same restaurant. Mark was usually out with friends, Jessica at her boyfriend, S. The house would be empty for at least 3 hours. That was my window. I needed the alarm code. Luck came from my arrogant, careless cousin, Mark. I accidentally spilled a drink on his laptop. In his panic, I watched his fingers tap the 4-digit code to disarm the alarm he'd just set, 1984. The year he married my aunt. How sentimental. The next Friday, the house emptied outright on schedule. I went to the alarm panel, my heart hammering against my ribs, and entered the code. The small light turned green. Disarmed. I walked straight to my father's old study. It was barely recognizable. The warm, cluttered room was gone, replaced by David's minimalist office. But the wall of bookshelves was still there, just like my mother said. Her clue was her birthday, June 14th, 0614. I pushed aside a row of legal thrillers and found the small keypad of the safe hidden behind them. I entered the code. A soft beep, and the heavy door swung open. And there it was, not gold or cash, just a thick black ledger and a stack of manila folders. I pulled them out, my hands shaking. No time to read. I stuffed the ledger and all the folders into the backpack I'd brought. Just as I closed the safe, I heard a car in the driveway. My blood froze. They were early. My mind raced. No time to get to the basement. The front door was their only way in. I looked at the large window behind the desk. It was my only chance. I fumbled with the latch, my fingers clumsy with panic. I threw the backpack onto the soft grass below and scrambled out after it, pulling the window shut behind me. I landed in a flower bed, the soft earth cushioning my fall. I grabbed the backpack and sprinted into the shadows of the tree line just as their headlights swept across the back of the house. I didn't look back. I just ran. I ran until the only sound was my own ragged breathing and the thud of the backpack, the weight of my family's truth against my shoulder. The game had changed. I wasn't a victim with a secret anymore. I was a hunter with proof. The evidence was overwhelming, a perfect roadmap of greed and lies. It was all there in my father's precise handwriting and the damning documents. Shell companies, fake invoices, secret offshore accounts. He had my uncle trapped on paper. But I knew just handing this to the police wasn't enough. David was rich. He was connected. He'd hire the best lawyers, bog it down in court for years, and paint me as a hysterical girl. No, justice couldn't be a quiet affair. His downfall had to be as loud and as humiliating as his betrayal was silent and cruel. If you've ever wanted to see karma served, not quietly, but for the whole world to watch, then you know what I had to do next. And if you love stories where the villain gets exactly what they deserve, make sure you subscribe, because this is just the beginning of the end for them. My uncle's greatest pride wasn't just his money, it was his reputation. He'd built this image of himself as a pillar of the community, a savvy businessman, a generous family patriarch. His annual charity gala for the Children's Hospital was the crown jewel of his social calendar. It was where the city's elite gathered at his home to write big checks, sip champagne, and applaud his manufactured generosity. This year's gala was in 2 months. It was the perfect stage. It was where I would burn his kingdom to the ground. Those 2 months were a blur of careful preparation. I didn't just have evidence. I had to build a case nobody could tear down. I found a lawyer, not a flashy corporate shark, but a bulldog named Maria Flores who specialized in financial crimes and had a reputation for taking on powerful men. I laid everything on her desk, the diary, the ledger, the folders. She listened for 2 hours without saying a word. When I finished, she just looked at me, a flicker of something fierce in her eyes. "He's not going to know what hit him," she said. Together, we planned the attack. We copied everything. We prepared a package for the district attorney and another for the SEC. But we didn't send them yet. The timing had to be perfect. Maria also hired a forensic accountant who verified every single thing my father had flagged, creating an independent report that turned my father's notes into indisputable facts. The night of the gala arrived. I didn't choose a dress to be beautiful, I chose it for battle. It was simple, black, and elegant, the kind of dress my mother would have picked. I walked up the long driveway, past the valets and the laughing guests. I walked right through the front door of my old home as if I owned it. For a moment, no one even noticed me. The air was thick with perfume and the sound of a string quartet. Then Aunt Carol saw me. Her champagne glass froze halfway to her mouth. Her face went slack with shock, then hardened into pure fury. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, starting towards me. "How dare you?" Her movement drew other eyes. My cousin Jessica's laugh died in her throat. Mark, standing with his friends, stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. And then I saw him. My Uncle David holding court by the fireplace. He saw me over a guest's shoulder. His smile didn't just fade. It was wiped clean from his face, replaced by a cold, primal fear. For the first time, I saw him not as a monster, but as a man who knew he was caught. He strode towards me, his public charm barely hiding his rage. "This is a private event," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You need to leave, now." "I don't think so," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the chatter. A small circle of silence began to form around us. "I think I have a right to be here, in my parents' home." "This is MY home," he seethed. "Security." But before any guards could move, Maria Flores stepped through the doorway, flanked by 2 grim-faced investigators from the DA's office. "David Harris," Maria said, her voice ringing out. "I believe you know why we're here." She held up a thick envelope. "This is a courtesy copy of a file just delivered to the district attorney, the SEC, and a certain Pulitzer-winning journalist at the city's paper. It details a decade-long conspiracy to commit wire fraud, mail fraud, and money laundering." A collective gasp went through the room. The music had stopped. Every single guest was now staring. David's face was chalk white. "This is absurd. This is slander. It's the fantasy of a troubled girl." "Is it a fantasy, David?" I asked, stepping forward. I pulled the diary from my clutch. "Is my mother's diary a fantasy? Are her last words, where she describes you threatening her and my father 2 days before they died, a fantasy?" I opened it to the last page and I read. My voice didn't shake. I read her words about his visit, his warning about secrets better left buried. I read her fear and her love for me. When I finished, the silence in the room was absolute. Aunt Carol looked like she was going to faint. Mark and Jessica stared at their father, their eyes wide with a dawning horror. The man they worshipped, the foundation of their perfect lives, was crumbling right in front of them. "And this," Maria continued, pulling the black ledger from her briefcase and holding it up for everyone to see, "is your brother's ledger. The one he kept detailing every crime you forced him into. The evidence he was going to bring to the authorities the day after he was killed." The word hung in the air. Killed. In that moment, everyone in that room, everyone who had ever admired David Harris, was forced to connect the dots. The tragic accident, the sudden inheritance, the timing. David looked around wildly at the faces of his friends, his business partners. He saw no support, only suspicion and disgust. He had built his world on lies, and I had just pulled out the keystone. The investigators stepped forward. "Mr. Harris, we need you to come with us." He didn't resist. He was just a deflated man. As they led him away, his eyes met mine one last time. There was no anger, no hatred, only the blank recognition of total defeat. He knew that I knew everything, and now so did the world. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The story was on the front page for weeks. The combination of the diary's emotional story and the ledger's cold facts was impossible to refute. The authorities launched a full investigation, not just into the financial crimes, but into my parents' deaths. While they could never prove foul play in a criminal court, the court of public opinion had reached its verdict. David was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and money laundering and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. The family's assets, all built on crime, were seized. The mansion was sold. The cars were repossessed. The entire glittering facade was repossessed by the truth. My inheritance was restored, what was left of it. Aunt Carol, stripped of her status and wealth, moved away to live with her sister, a pariah in the society she once ruled. Mark and Jessica were left to deal with the shame of their father's legacy. Last I heard, Mark was working a menial job he used to mock, and Jessica had cut off all contact with her mother, trying to build a new life under a new name. She sent me a letter once, just one sentence. "I'm sorry for what he did, and I'm sorry we believed him." I never wrote back. As for me, I bought a small house in a quiet town by the sea. I cleared my parents' names and established a scholarship in their honor. The money was a tool, but it was never the point. The point was the truth. Sometimes at night I take out the music box. I don't open the secret drawer anymore. I just wind the key. It plays a simple, beautiful melody, the one my mother loved. It's a bittersweet sound. It's the sound of loss, yes, but it's also the sound of justice. They said I betrayed my family, but I was only ever loyal to the truth. And in the end, the truth was the only family I had left. It wasn't a clean victory. The scars of what they did will always be there. But so will the strength I found in the wreckage. I learned that grief can be fuel, and that the most powerful inheritance isn't money or property, but the courage to fight for what's right. They thought they had buried me with their secrets, but they only showed me where to dig. If my story resonates with you, and if you believe that the truth is always worth fighting for, no matter how hard it is, then please consider subscribing. There are countless stories of justice waiting to be told, and by sharing them, we remind ourselves that even in the darkest times, one person can be the light that exposes it all. Thank you for listening.